and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn with me, Julie Cameron, a business growth specialist with Action Coach Solly Hull. Now, I am delighted to have Rekha Haughton with us today. Hi, Rekha.
Hello, good afternoon. Are you well, Julie?
I'm good, thank you very much. Rekha is joining us today. She is part of the Cedar and Trust Limited, and she's here to share with us her business journey, her expertise, her knowledge about why getting that will in place is so important, and also to make it simple. I remember sitting with Rekha. She's a fellow BI member in the Birmingham region, and Rekha did her 10-minute presentation, and I loved it, which is one of the reasons why I wanted her to come on to today's, because it was very simple, very straightforward, and I think that the complex issue of wills and trusts sometimes becomes too complex for a lot of people, and you just made it very simple and very straightforward. So it was one of my reasons for inviting you along today, Rekha. But if you are out there on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, let us know where you are listening in from this lunchtime. Tell us a little bit more about you. And if you have any questions at all for Rekha or for myself, then please do pop them in the comments, the chats, and we will ask them as we go on. No pressure there, Rekha, at all. Let's see the most complex question that we have coming up. Ask away. That's what I like to hear. But the first question that I always love to ask on my Lunch and Learns is, tell me a little bit more about you, about your business journey so far, Rekha. Go for it.
Okay, so I've been, I think business work, not revealing age, but you're looking at a sort of 25, 30-year journey so far. I started my life in the corporate world. I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. I wasn't very scientifically minded, and I didn't know what to do at uni. So I thought, well, let me just dabble and see what's around, work as a temp to see where my interest lies. And I ended up working at a company called Parcelline, who are now DPD, because they sold out. And so everyone will have heard of DPD, but they started off before, years and decades ago, they were Parcelline. And it was when I was working within their customer services office. I really loved, I used to have to walk through the sales office to go and make tea. And as being the temp, I was making a lot of tea all the time. And it was there, actually, I listened to the sales reps and they'd be chatting, they'd be talking to clients on the phone, and they'd be driving in their lovely cars, and the women would be wearing their beautiful suits. I'm thinking, I could do that. I'd listen to them on the phone going, I could chat like that. And that's how it pretty much started. So, within a year, actually, I ended up getting a permanent contract, and Parcelline ended up promoting me, and I was on the road repping for them. So all very, very quick, actually, because once I get my head into something, that's it. I just go for it. Yeah. And I stayed with Parcelline for a number of years. And then I moved over to a company called Pitney Bowes. A lot of people remember them. They were very, very big at the time, doing mailing systems and franking machines predominantly. Did that for a number of years. Really enjoyed that, actually. Was in there for about 5-6 years. And then just moved over briefly into telecommunications. Then started a family. So it was very, very difficult to be out on the road all the time, pounding the motorways. So I got a job as an account manager for the NEC based at the ICC on Broad Street. Yeah. So very different, I guess, sector, going into hospitality, conferences and events. Did that for quite a number of years, and then went to work for Manchester United as their head of non-match day sales, basically.
Wow.
So everything other than Premier League games and Champion League games, it was me and my department that looked after the stadium. And believe it or not, Old Trafford was so underutilised. Really? 5% of the globe are Man United fans. But people didn't realise that outside of football, you can utilise the suites there that they use for match day hospitality. You can utilise those for conferences, for events, exhibitions, private dinners, weddings, etc. So that was my remit, really. And we had X Factor there at the time. We hosted the rugby final. We did a load of the player testimonial game. So that was a very surreal time. Yes. For a couple of years then. And then moved over to a company, it's not a company, it's a university. I worked as deputy commercial director for Brunel University. Yeah. And that was really different because it was a first foray really into public sector. Very, very different, but very similar as well, because all the regulations and the red tape was still the same, I guess, as corporate, but just different issues really. And it was very tough to try and change the universities to try and look at things more commercially, because funding is being reduced more and more from the government. So it's important for universities to start being more commercial. So, but it was fantastic, and Brunello, a great university in Uxbridge. But then one thing led to another, and a couple of personal things happened, and I ended up just thinking, right, I just set my own business up. I'm not going to go into loads of details. I'm happy to chat to people, but I'm just mindful of time and stuff. And just with a family death, especially, realize the importance of wills, because I come from an Indian background, and I guess first generation in the sense that my parents came over here in the 60s. So very, very different outlook than my parents, and they kind of have the same thought process as the rules in India, and they're just so different here. And especially as a community, we just don't understand really the importance of protecting assets, writing wills in this country. But then when I started looking into it, it wasn't just a cultural thing. When you looked at the figures, because I was part of the SWW companies there for training, etc., because I wanted to self-regulate, because will writing isn't regulated. But because of my background, I wanted to self-regulate, so I made sure we joined the SWW, so we trained with them. I did all my hours with them, got my CPD training hours, etc. And I think at one point they were giving us figures that 65% of the population in the UK just don't have a will.
Wow.
And it's quite a shocking figure, really. And I think more shocking now, because I guess 50, 60 years ago, the world and the UK was very different. I think back then, people didn't have loads of assets. They had one property generally. When people married, they married for life. It was a very different, even in the UK culturally was very different then. It's really different now. Now we don't leave money in banks because we just don't earn anything. So people buy a lot of assets. We've got a growing population. So houses land is a lot more expensive. That's pushing prices up. We have more blended families. The ONS states that 1 in every 3 marriages end in divorce.
Wow.
And then we marry. So we have blended families. I have clients that are saying, well, I've got, I'm on my second relationship, I'm on my third marriage, and I've got children, and I've got various assets, I've got businesses, and that's really why I started it, thinking, well, I don't think I'm quite a stupid person, but we didn't realize the importance of a will. So if I didn't realize, and other people you speak to haven't got wills either, it's something actually we should look at. And it's information, people think it's fine, it'll go to my next of kin, it'll go there. It's not the case at all.
No. It's quite interesting, because like you literally have spotted a gap in the market, a gap of underutilized kind of service when you're looking at it through personal circumstances of your own. And I think some business owners out there have done exactly the same. They've spotted this gap, they're good at certain aspects of it, and go, no, I can do this. I can do this. Do you think that kind of because obviously writing wills wasn't something that you had done previously at all in your career? Was that the scariest aspect of it, or what was the scariest aspect of setting up your own business?
Honestly, the scariest aspect, bizarrely, because with the, I'd held some massive budgets, and I was responsible for a lot of, hundreds and hundreds of people in my time, and it was very different writing out a business strategy for some big corporate companies. But I guess when you're doing it by yourself, it's where are my clients going to come from? And it's where do you go? I've now said I understand the importance. I've done a lot of training. Where do you start? And I kind of think it's like with any business, you start backwards. Where do I want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 5 years? And then just started off talking to friends and family, really, and saying, you know, this is it. This is the situation. Let's get everyone's wills. And then it's just word of mouth, because I guess it's when it's like everything, you don't know what you don't know, but when you do know it and you have a good experience of it, you tell other people. And I'm kind of quite a gregarious personality anyway, and death is so morbid. Who wants to talk about the thought of dying? Nobody, honestly, neither do I. However, it's a fact. We are going to die one day. And I think we just bury our heads in the sand. But what we're doing by doing that is we are leaving so many problems for our children and our generations and our beneficiaries that then have to sort it. And many times sorting it by losing a lot of money out of the estate to give to the government. And again, I'm thinking, why give everything to the government when the government give you policies and give you help to, you know, like any business, you've got plenty of policies where you can mitigate tax. Same with inheritance tax. They give you an allowance, £325,000 for an individual, but they also give you policies to help you mitigate your inheritance tax. You just got to find them. And that's my job, to find them and just make it as uncomplicated and as pleasant as possible. It doesn't need to be morbid. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think it's part of the culture thing. You go back to that culture aspect, and British people are very good at burying our heads in the sand. We're very good at queuing. We're very good at but we're very good at when it becomes too difficult, or we perceive it as difficult, to kind of push it away, aren't we? It's not. We don't confront things. I think that's part of our culture. We don't confront it as we should do, if you know what I mean. And I think wills become part of that kind of aspect. So what's the difference between a will and a trust?
Okay, a will basically is a legal document that you put. You draw a will up. It can be on a piece of paper. There are a few things that make it legal, and basically all you're doing is writing your. Sorry, my dog's just having a look at the. Sorry, this is a. So she just wants to be part of it. She wants to sit next to me. It's a documentation that just sets out your desires. So a will comprises really mainly in 3 parts. Firstly, it asks for an executor. So when you pass away, who's going to execute your will? Who will do all the administration? Who's going to talk to the banks to close their accounts down? Who's going to apply to probate? So it's an executor. Very often, husband and wife do it for one another. Always write a backup. It's always good for a backup if both of you die together. And there's no conflict of interest. That executor can be absolutely anybody. I know a lot of people will perhaps, if they've had a will done at a solicitor's, the solicitors may sort of advise you to have them as executors. Honestly, I don't think you need to. Some of our clients say, will you be the executor? And I say, look, it's a simple enough process. Use your loved ones, and they can always get some help if you want to. But it's up to you who you use as an executor. It can be anybody or an organisation. Also, then if you've got children under the age of 18 years old, you need to think of a guardian. And this is one of my biggest concerns, because it's one of the biggest myths there are around, that if something happens to, say, husband and wife go on date night and both of them pass away, God forbid, in a car accident, a lot of people say, doesn't matter, our kids will go to our mum or my sister or my brother. Well, with the absence of a will, they will not go immediately to your family.
Oh, wow.
If they don't go, you have to have a will that has a guardian in there. If there is no will, the children become ward of courts. Right. So they go to basically your local authorities. They can go into temporary foster home until a member of your family comes forward, or somebody comes forward to apply for a permanent guardianship of that child. So that's why it is. I say to people, if you've got, I've had clients that say, we rent, we don't really own any asset. And I say, you know what? You've got kids, just write the most basic, simple will that names a guardian. Because
Wow.
ultimately you've got to think about it. If there is no will, so my will, when my children were under 18, said that if anything happens to my husband tonight, I'd like my children to go to that person, because that's my choice. Without a will, how does the local authorities know where your child goes to? And also, do they just hand over a child to a member of your family that could potentially be an abuser that they don't know anything about? That's why they've got a duty of care to that child. So that's why it's important. So think of a guardian, somebody who you'd want to look after your child who's under 18. And then very simply, your beneficiary is who's going to inherit everything after you pass away.
Mm-hmm.
A trust is the best way to think about a trust, I say, is a safe. Whatever you put inside, you put a trust is a safe. So whatever you put inside a safe is safeguarded. There are really two types of trusts. If you break it down to the bare nitty gritty, there's a lifetime trust and a will trust. So very simply, where a trust works in the will is that, for example, I had a client, this is a couple of years back, before COVID actually, lovely lady, had been so stressed into writing a will because she just did not know what to do. She'd got 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Her son was in his 20s and unfortunately was quite a serious heroin addict. So she said, I just don't know what to do, because and her estate was worth quite a decent amount. He would inherit a few, 200 odd thousand pounds. He said, once he gets that money, he'll just be dead because he'll just overdose. She says, I just don't know what to do. And this is a classic situation where a trust would help. So what we did is, instead of giving him his money directly to him, we created a discretionary trust within her will, which said that his share of the estate, because she didn't want to exclude him either, his share of the estate went into a trust, so went into a safe, and her 2 daughters were the trustees. So they would manage that trust as well. So they would make sure. So basically, the instructions were that, obviously, because he was in and out of rehab, when he was out of rehab, they were to give him a lot more money. When he was back on the drugs, they would make sure that he wasn't getting a lot of money. So that's where a trust really helps as well. Sorry, the post. Oh my gosh, it's a nightmare. The postman's been.
Fine. Postman has to come. The postman has to come.
Right today, bless them. And so this is where a trust works. You know, this works great with disabled children as well, because I have clients that say, I have a disabled child, however, my fear is if they inherit their share of money, then the benefits that they get, they'll stop receiving those benefits. So, and I find that a little bit unfair. So there's lots of things that we can do. We can make sure that assets are put in separately. So those trusts sit within wills and they are activated when people pass away. The other trust is a lifetime trust. So we set it up when that person's alive. And we can set it up by using your allowance. So remember earlier on, I said that the government gives us an allowance. For trust purposes, for trust purposes, it's your main nil rate band, which is £325,000. There is another residential nil rate band of 175,000, but that's for inheritance. You know, that's as a whole. But for trust purposes, we can use a married couple's allowance and set up a trust for the value of 325 times 2, 650. So a safe. And they can put any asset up to £650,000 into that trust, tax-free. And that's used to protect an asset. They use that to protect against any creditors. So anyone that's after your money, tries to sue you, tries to take money off you, tries to take property off you, those trusts are fantastic, because whatever asset you put in that trust cannot be touched.
Interesting.
Really, really clever. We do a lot of those trusts. People may want to put properties into it. I did a trust quite recently, about 6 months ago, where a client wanted to lend his daughter some money to buy a house, but he, if I just give them 100 odd grand, I might not ever see it again. So it was like, well, that's fine. Let's put 100,000 in the trust. Then that trust lends your daughter the 100,000. So if she sets up with her boyfriend, that 100,000 comes back into the trust, and she will always be a beneficiary. So your money's being safeguarded, and your daughter's inheritance is being safeguarded. So there's just lots of clever things that we can do. A trust is a way of protecting, I would say. Yeah. Sorry, 10 hours later, I've answered your question.
No, I love it because I find it fascinating, because it's like, you know, I mean, I have a will, you know, but actually, you know, Glenn, my husband, was the one that sort of said, we need to sort this out. And I was just like, but it had never kind of really crossed my mind. Oh yeah, I need to sort it out. Yes, and we have a guardian for Harry, you know, and all of those things organised. But it was only through talking to somebody that actually, and they ask you those questions, do you go, oh my gosh, I need to think about that. I need to, you know, think about what's this happening, what's that happening, and it can become quite complex very, very quickly, can't it? With the amount of assets that you've got and so on and so forth. But what's a great first step? Is it just literally, have you got children, get the guardian in place? Is that the first step, the best step to start thinking? If you're going
honestly, yeah. If you've got children under the age of 18 and you don't have a will, just put the most basic, simple will in place. Honestly, it's cheap as chips. I don't mind. I can reveal. Can I say prices?
Yeah.
I don't mind. I mean, a will for two people is £150 plus the VAT. You know, it's under £200 for two people. You know, I think some people spend more on a night out, don't they? I know there's a lot of, you know, there's a living crisis at the moment, cost of living crisis, etc. I do completely understand that. But we have an online will service that you can go onto our website, and it's cheap. It's even cheaper than that. Do one, but just do a basic one as well. Think about your assets. Think about what you have. Do you need specific guidance on inheritance tax planning? Remember the other allowance I said that you had was a residential nil rate band of 175,000. There are some parameters on there, but as long as your main property is worth under £2 million, that added on to your 325 gives an individual £500,000 each. So as a married couple, you can leave up to £1 million of asset inheritance tax free. It sounds an awful lot, but honestly, when you just think about the value of your property and you start adding up what you have, you know, actually people start thinking a million's a lot. Actually, it isn't an awful lot. So it's starting to think about that, because there are things that we can do to mitigate inheritance tax. Business owners, people with limited companies, have you thought of what happens? But not even sole director. I mean, I've got lots of clients that have got really successful businesses that are turning over a lot of money, that are sole directors. And I'm saying, if something happened to you, but even before death, what happens if you lost mental capacity and you've got 100% shares in a limited company? How does that affect that business? Do you have powers of attorney in place? Business powers of attorney? Who assumes control of that company? You may have a company that have two directors and one loses mental capacity. How does that company run? As with 50-50 shares, the director that has capacity can't even sell the business because he doesn't have majority share. You know, it's thinking about the business and succession planning for, I mean, anything can happen. I've got a client that was 34 at the time who had a stroke. No sign of stroke in their family, but a 34-year-old had a stroke. We don't know what's around the corner. Plan for the worst. Make sure, especially with a business, you're covered.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so like for a business owner out there and they're thinking about their business, is this something that's separate to their will that they should sort out, Rekha, or is it all encompassing?
It's all encompassing. It's getting powers of attorney in place, getting a business power of attorney to say, well, okay, if Director A lost capacity, what happened? Because Director A might be the sales and marketing director, and Director B of the business may be the one that does all the operations, that's very strategic, that, like I says, does all the paperwork type thing that isn't salesy. So if Director A loses capacity and Director B is thinking, well, I'm not a salesy person, how do we get business in? What do we do now? You know, Director A is sitting in a coma. You know, have we got the banking covered? Can we even pay bills, and can we sign checks? And it's just thinking about what happens. Whereas at least then with the business power of attorney in place, you can say, well, actually, if something happens to me, then these are the instructions. I nominate that person to be able to come in. My wife, my partner, my son, whoever it is, can come into the business just to make sure that business is running properly.
And that can be anybody that you nominate. It's not restricted in any way, shape, or form.
No, because powers of attorney sit in with the individual person. It's not it doesn't belong to the company. It belongs to the actual person. So, which is really, this is like what we do is we sit down with company directors together to talk about the business aspect of it. Well, what happens to your business shares? A lot of time they don't take insurances out. I'm not an IFA. I cannot give any kind of financial advice. However, I do know that there are policies in place that if Director A passes away, then if that goes to the wife, then the company can take out policies to pay shares out, all of that kind of thing. A lot of people don't have that in place. So it's like, well, can you afford to pay the wife her shares if something happens to you?
Yeah.
Powers of attorney. And also in the will, you need to write business trusts within your own personal will to make sure that your business value of your shares doesn't fall into your personal estate. So there's quite a lot to think about, actually. But again, it doesn't need to be, it's just about being factual. It's just getting everything together. It can be painful for some people, but I guess it's that peace of mind. And that's what when someone asks what I do, is I just give people peace of mind that, you know what, it's in place, it's done. Revisit it every few years if you want to, because circumstances change, money changes, but just have a look at it. We'll chat to you. We don't charge consultation fees or anything. It's just about talking. It's good to talk.
It's good to talk. That's that common phrase, isn't it? It's good to talk. It's good to talk. But it's so true. It was going to be one of my questions I had to ask you. A lot of people set up wills, years ago and so on. Should they be reviewed annually? Should they be looked at within a certain time period, or is it a case of, well, I did it and that's it, I forget about it?
I mean, it's worth having a look at. I went to see a client not so long ago. He was a lovely, lovely man. He was in his 70s and he just wanted me to do his powers of attorney. So I said, would you like me to have a look at your will? He said, no, I've done it. You don't need to have a look at it. I said, I don't mind while I'm here reading it. And he went, oh, okay, you can have a quick look at it if you like. And he got it out. So I was just reading through it from the top, and I said, and your executor, we'll just call him John Doe. Your executor, John, is John Doe. And he went, yeah, that's my best friend. He said he passed away 5 years ago. And I said, right, okay. So he's your only executor here. And he was like, oh yeah. Oh, I think you better do my will for me. And he'd completely forgotten, whilst he was distraught that his best friend had died, but he didn't think that actually he was the only executor. So I'm like, well, okay, you don't actually have an executor at the moment. So that's probably where it's good to relook at it. Plus also people change their mind. There are family dynamics. People fall out with certain family members, or fortunes change. People have made more money, whereas they've just done a very simple mirror will, to husband and wife, and then to the children. They may want to put something in a little bit more robust, especially as there's lots of challenges with blended families. So rather than passing everything on to husband and wife, a lot of modern day wills, rather than passing it to one another, their share goes into a trust for the child. Their shares go in trust for children, because say husband dies, leaves everything to his wife. She remarries and she passes away, everything goes to the new husband. So the children get sideways disinherited, so they get nothing. Whereas more modern will is his share goes into a trust for the kids, her share goes in trust for her kids. So his money doesn't go to her, goes to the children in a trust, but she still has access to the estate. So this just makes sure that if the other spouse remarries, it just makes sure your kids get something.
Just shows that how much the world has changed in the last 50 years, I suppose, in that respect. Because I'm just thinking back to my parents' generation. Mum and dad have got a will, but equally like you say, it's that 50, 60-year-old marriage that would pass to either, and then it would go down to the kids, and that's about as basic as it goes. Whereas obviously with blended families and, you know, that connotation of bringing business in there as well, you know, you've got quite a complex document of things, of questions that need to be asked and answered, which can be quite difficult and challenging for whoever you're asking them to do it, if you know what I mean, aren't you? Do you think with the COVID pandemic and with, you know, everything that the whole world has been through in the last couple of years, that wills and what you do has come to the forefront of people's minds?
Hugely, especially with powers of attorney as well. And yes, and wills, because all of a sudden we just think, crumbs, we're not infallible really, or, you know, anything can happen to us. Nobody could I mean, if you'd have said to us even 5 years ago that this was going to happen, we'd laugh at one another. But all of a sudden something unthinkable has happened, and it's really changed people. Plus also, more and more people are seeing assets being stripped away from parents, grandparents, because of care fees and things. Like I said, people are seeing more repercussions because the amounts of deaths, people that have passed away. People are seeing more, you know, it's out in the open a lot more. People are discussing it more. And I think as the generations are going, the generations are changing. So my generation talks a little bit more. The generation below me, you know, chat even more than us. You know, wills aren't something that they shy away from. Still, people, again, I think, again, it's cultural that you don't want to actually say how much you have.
Because it's talk about money.
Crass, isn't it? It's crass. You don't talk about money. And there are sometimes some clients don't want to tell me how much their worth is. That's absolutely fine. I just give them the guidance. This is, you know, up to $1 million, you're okay. Over $1 million, start thinking about it. And they'll make their own choice whether they'll no, actually we're not up to there yet, so we're okay for a basic one. So yeah, it's I wish there was more. I wish there was a lot more information on that. It was said more. But then I guess when the government, when the Treasury makes so much money out of inheritance tax, are they going to tell you to, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm being cynical. I mean, I'm so not anti-government or anti-taxes. You know, we make sure that our taxes are all paid for and everything. But like I said, if they give you policies, if they help you to mitigate it, then please sit down and mitigate it. Why pay more? Why pay more when you don't have to?
I was going to say, surely if they wanted you to pay more, then they would give those policies so that you can mitigate it. At the end of the day, it's there to be utilised, isn't it? It's there to be used, but it's having that knowledge, or speaking to someone who's got that knowledge and that expertise about where to look. Because if you don't have it, you won't look for it. If you don't know that they're there in the first place, and I suppose this is where your knowledge, your expertise comes into it. That if people are wanting that explanation, that help, that guidance, that support in doing this and getting the most, leaving the most for their kind of their children or their business or whatever, then they need to go to somebody who's a specialist. You wouldn't,
just chat about it. I'm finding more, you know, when I say to people, when I'll go and see people, I say, you know, ask your children in the meeting or the Zoom call, because we can speak to people, you know, we speak to people over Zoom. But invite your family. And you know, and people ask me, can my son come? But have everyone there, have the whole family there. I think I love it. You know, I know some people say, well, you know, I've been told I can't have it's up to you. You know, in terms of our data protection, you know, if you consent to having your family there, and I love it, you know, because then the children, the grandchildren, everyone gets involved, everyone's understanding the asset, and I think it's fantastic. And the awareness is building. More and more people have it. Over COVID, over the pandemic and lockdown, we were so busy because, again, people saying, you know, something could happen, and let's just get it. Like I said, it's just peace of mind. Once you've done it, you've done it. We look at it every 3 years.
I was going to say, that the beauty of bringing the whole family involved is that it actually is showing your wishes, isn't it? You know, it's not through a piece of paper that can be interpreted in many different ways. It's not giving the rationale, it's not giving the reasons. It's actually you're listening to that person who's saying, well, actually, I'm going to leave you this, or I want you to have this, or I'm wanting this because of. You know, and it's that understanding, is it? And sometimes I think that wills and death is quite, you know, it's an emotional, volatile time, and that's where conflict can arise through either a will or the leaving of assets. And so therefore, the more people are informed beforehand, the more smoother that process is, I suppose.
It is, and money, it's terrible. You know, what the worst thing as a parent you want is that after you, your children, whoever your beneficiaries, squabbling over money, which
Yeah.
is why when it's in writing, it's your wish. Children very often will say, well, that's what mum and dad wanted.
Yeah.
That's what they wanted. And that's, you know, it's in writing, it's there. And that's why a lot of them will want the children in front of them. So there's no squabbling afterwards, because you don't want your children arguing and falling out over things. And it's not very often the children, it's people in their ears that are just going, oh, did you not get that, and whatever. And money can change people, you know, the ones that say, oh, we don't want anything, and all of a sudden, you know, there is money there, they want it. Whereas and if you don't have a will, the intestacy law will then open up the family tree as such, and you know, your spouse gets a specific amount, etc., and you can contest that. So that's why I just put it in black and white, so there's no arguments afterwards.
Yeah. So you touched on, you very briefly said there, it was going to be my next question. So if you don't have a will, what happens to your estate if you don't have one?
It goes by the intestacy law. So the intestacy law basically is your family tree. So your first £250,000 worth of asset goes to your spouse. Not all of it goes to your spouse immediately, just the first 250,000 then gets shared amongst the children. But it doesn't stop members of the family putting in and say, well, Rekha promised me 30,000. Well, Rekha must have been very drunk if she said that. But no, it doesn't stop other people, because you know, the intestacy law opens up like the family tree, and it goes down all the levels. So
I was going to say, I suppose this is where it's important that what happens if that's not a husband or not a wife, that you're not married?
Yeah.
Do you know, are they still entitled if you don't have a will? Do you know what I mean? Do they still get that? Is there that kind of, because you're living together or you have children, are they entitled to it? Or is it that just totally like, it's a no-go?
Well, it just always goes down to next of kin. So your spouse is your first next of kin, first 250. But if you don't have a spouse and you have children, then your children get that portion. But if you have neither, I mean, we have people in there, you know, that have just first step on the property ladder and just bought properties, and they've bought it and they've got no will. And I says, but if you pass away, then to say Mr. Brown, if you pass away, Mr. Brown, your girlfriend doesn't get half this house. Half the house that you just bought together goes to your parents, because they're your next of. Oh my gosh, did not know that, but we bought it together, and she should get it, and he should. Well, you've got to write your wills. You've got to write your wills to say that each other get it. Then, otherwise, your mum and dad will get it, and there's nothing stopping them moving and going, right, this half is. Well, it's like
that's so true.
Half the house is theirs, and if the son hasn't written a will to say it goes to his girlfriend, then the parents get it. So that's why it's there's lots of assumptions. But it's like us all, you know, when I've got a snivel, I go onto the internet and I think I've cured myself. But it's really worth just speaking to somebody and just getting some advice.
Yeah, no, I think it's enlightening, Rekha. I think people don't recognise the importance or the impact not having something like this can have after they've gone, if you know what I mean. So like you said, Glenn's just put on it could be cozy living with parents-in-law.
Not mine, but no.
But it's so true. You don't necessarily think it, or you know, they could turn around and say, well, actually we need the cash, so we're kicking you out, we want to sell it. You know,
exactly.
Do you know what I mean? It can come both ways. And what can you have a will? Is it 18 and up that you can have a will that you should? Yeah, not prior to. You know, so yeah, 18 and above. So as a business owner, what's your biggest learnings in setting up your business? What's your biggest kind of learning as a business owner that you've had?
Plan. Any business, when I was in my positions beforehand, it's plan. And I know it sounds so you know, it's cheesy, isn't it? But it is about planning, getting out there, networking, talking to people. Honestly, it's biggest thing ever as a business owner. Plan. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there?
Yeah, totally agree.
Plan. Okay. Take advice from people, you know, even like people from yourselves. Take advice from people that can give you. Don't afraid to take help. Another thing as well is, I think sometimes it's like, we know it, you know, I spent 30 years in corporate, but I don't know everything. I'm constantly learning. So don't be afraid to ask for help. plan your business, get out there, network. You just don't know who you meet.
Yeah, totally.
It's bizarre. I met somebody networking, and that got me on the TV, and I had my own show for a while on a car channel with a seat channel. It was amazing, you know. So it's get out there, talk to people.
Wow! And what's the biggest challenge that you faced?
My biggest challenge, my God, that's a really good question. I don't know where to start with that one. What do I find challenging? I think it's when I know somebody, is when people need to do something and they just don't want to do anything, and I can't help them because they won't be helped. And I find I don't know how to overcome that sometimes, because they know they know there's massive, they know the potential problems, but they just don't want to listen. And it's how do you overcome that? But you can't fix the world. No, and I guess for me, I've got to just move away. And I guess I'll take things personally, though. That's the problem. I am very, I've got a great relationship with all my clients. I've got wonderful clients, but if I can't help somebody, how do you overcome that?
Yeah, I think it's about that education, isn't it? So it's like educating them you can only take them so far. It's a bit like with coaching. We always say it comes down to attitude. We may sit here and a bit like yourself, you kind of go, well, you need this, and it can become that massive frustration as a business owner, because you're like, you need it, so why aren't you doing it? But actually, if they don't want to, they have to have that desire, don't they? They have to see that kind of that need and that openness, I suppose, to listen to experts like yourself, like us, in that field, and actually recognize that they know more. And that they're doing this as a benefit for you, rather than it's not them telling you what you're doing wrong or anything like that. So it's kind of you can only take them so far. Like you just said very eloquently, you can't solve the problems of the world, can you? You know what I mean? It's doing one thing at a time. But I've loved today, Rekha. Thank you so much for joining us. There's been some comments, good afternoon. People who said good afternoon. There's a lady called Celeste. On there, Renetta is coming from South Africa. We've got a lady from South Africa online listening to us. So it's amazing to if anybody has any questions for Rekha, what we'll do is pop all Rekha's details into the comment boxes on Facebook, LinkedIn, onto our Action Coach one as well, so that people can reach out to you to have those conversations, to get those rules in place, because they are so important. And not just from a personal perspective, but from a business perspective at all. And I think that's going to be one of those light bulb moments for a lot of our business listeners out there, is actually hadn't thought of that. What happens if I become incapacitated? What is going to happen to the business moving forward? And I think it's a question that we all need to ask ourselves as business owners as well. So thank you so much. If anybody has any comments or questions for Rekha, please drop them on the comments. We'll be monitoring them for the next couple of days, and if there is anything, we will pass them on. So thank you very much for joining us, Rekha.
Lovely being here. Thank you, Julie.